Welcome, Nicole, to Struggle to Strength.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Mary Beth.
Well, it's wonderful to have you with me and can't wait to get into our conversation. But quickly, I'm just going to introduce myself before we get started. So, my name is Mary Beth Simone, and I am the founder of Niche Partnership Consulting. And my business was born out of being able to use a personal struggle and turn it into a strength by creating my business. And through this platform, my goal is to interview guests who have also translated their struggle into a strength in hopes that it will help you, the listener, to identify the strengths that you have developed as a result of your struggles. So, welcome, Nicole. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. Um, and today we're going to talk about how you found transformation through your child's development journey. So, I'm very excited to talk with you about this. And before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're working on right now?
Sure. So I started a long time ago. My background is in mental health counseling. I actually studied it throughout graduate school, and that was the career path that I chose at that time. I jumped headfirst into working with teenage girls. Was actually, the group of people that I was passionate about serving, and my career started there. Um, with the birth of my son, and he actually has a twin sister, things kind of shifted. So once I shifted, it led me to facilitation. So I facilitated workshops for nonprofit people working in service type industries. And then from there, pivoted into leadership development and speaking and doing a lot of work in that space. And then eventually owning my own business where now I use my speaking and all of the expertise that I have gleaned, across the years of working with really thousands and thousands of people in the capacity of facilitation, coaching, etc. And I'm here now, so it's kind of a combination. It's combination of mental health, uh, learning and development, talent development um, within the leadership space, and now really trying to empower professional women to show up boldly.
I love that. And speaking of your experience speaking, that is how we met. We
Yes.
met at Speaking Your Brand's retreat. So Nicole and I are both public speakers. And I would say that at the retreat, Nicole, you were just like head and shoulders above the rest. Like your performance was amazing. And I think Carol had to say a couple times, now don't compare yourself to Nicole.
You're sweet.
So I think hopefully the audience will pick up on a little bit more of that as we go through the interview. And for anyone who's with us, if you have any questions or comments along the way, please drop them in, and we should be able to see them pop up, and we'll bring you into the conversation and answer your questions.
Awesome.
So Nicole, can you share with us what life looked like leading up to your son's diagnosis?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, I was in graduate school and I was one of those people. I'm a lifelong learner, so I am passionately involved in anything I can get my hands on. So in graduate school, I was fully immersed. I basically solidified employment before I had graduated. And I was full force, as I mentioned, working in the space with teenage girls. And I was in a relationship. I was in love, and I ended up becoming pregnant. And surprise, I was not only pregnant, I had twins. So I completely shifted my life. I moved back home to South Florida, which is where I'm originally from, and it began the journey of not only being pregnant with twins but having twins. And so I went from someone who was, very driven, professional, oriented, and just really had my life paved out as far as what I wanted to accomplish, how I was going to do it, and the timeline that I was going to do it in. And so when I, had the twins, I mean, if you can imagine the amount of money it takes to raise one child at a time, to have two at the same time required me to stay at home. So I was thrust into the life of not a single at that time, stay-at-home mom, I wanted to say. So right up until that point, my life had already shifted because of having twins. And then once you have the twins, you have two people that are essentially growing up together. So even though you understand the milestones, you're watching it in real time. And I noticed that my son wasn't hitting some of the milestones that my daughter was. He hit all the physical milestones. So he sat up at the same time she did. He walked the same week that she did. But some of the other things, it became apparent that he wasn't quite developing in the same way.
That is fascinating. Just the aspect of having twins and being able to compare their development in real time. Yeah, and I think just I'm an aunt of two sets of twins,
Wow.
and yeah, and they're all siblings. So it was one set, and 2 years later, the second set came. And
Incredible.
I, yeah, and I used to like to like go and spend time after they got home from the hospital, and I would just be so exhausted.
Oh,
I would
yeah.
be like, I don't have children, but I would be like, oh my, like, how are they even gonna survive? It
Yeah.
was overwhelming.
Yeah, I would say the first 5 years are a complete fog. I know I mean, I
I'm
remember things,
sure.
right, but it was difficult. We used to have to log when they would eat and when they would go to the bathroom, so you don't have to remember it. We actually kept a log.
Yeah, because there's just so much going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine as your first children to have 2 at one time. It's
So
amazing.
yeah.
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 Um, so, so then that was how you, first identified that there was a difference.
Yes.
Uh, so then you talked to the pediatrician. What was the diagnosis process like?
So that's such a great question, and so many, like, no, there's no like blueprint for this. So one, I knew something was wrong, and when I would mention it to family members, I was kind of brushed off like, oh, no, boys develop a little bit slower, you're good, right? But I did have one of my friends at the time whose parent was a speech therapist, and she was the one that really pushed me to say, no, I think your gut is right, I think you need to go get him assessed. So yes, so through my pediatrician, my son was assessed by a team of doctors. So it was a speech language pathologist, an occupational therapist, a psychologist. I think I'm missing one, but it was a team of doctors, and it's this really comprehensive assessment that measures, all sorts of things. And at that time, I wasn't thinking autism. I just knew that there was something developmentally different. And so at the end of that assessment, the pediatrician, had the consultation with me and asked me at that time, "Have you ever heard of autism?" And to be honest, I hadn't. I kind of heard of it, but it wasn't something that I knew too much about. And he said, "I think that he's on the spectrum," and he identified some key things that showed up in his evaluation that were pointing in that direction. So number one, they did a test where they showed him his reflection in a mirror, and he didn't recognize himself. Another example is they threw a ball to him, and he didn't understand how to engage with a ball, which I had never noticed that. Maybe when we had balls at home, it was just being thrown around, and I really wasn't paying attention if my son was interacting in the same way. I thought that was interesting. And another thing that showed up is that he didn't do something what's called joint attention, where you, especially if you're pre-verbal, and you want a caregiver to see something, if they want like, some juice or they want an item, he didn't know how to help me to see or point to what he wanted.
Mm.
And those were the things that showed up. On the other side, he was extremely affectionate. He would look at you right in your eyes. He did have interaction with other kids. So there's a spectrum of things, right? It's not just one thing that happens here. So ultimately, his diagnosis was developmentally delayed, not otherwise specified, which is basically fancy to say he's on the spectrum. He's
Oh,
on a spectrum of things that show up in this category of diagnosis.
and Nicole, is there like a certain age like where he would be too young to be diagnosed, or do you have to wait to a certain? I'm just curious.
Sure. I'm definitely not an expert, so anyone should definitely consult with their pediatrician. But I think around 18 months is a milestone. Like that is the time where you need to get intervention. And the earlier you intervene, the better, because that will indicate the level of success and of the integrated supports that are needed in order to kind of guide the process.
Oh, that's really good. That's really good to know, that it can be that you can get assistance that early, that you can get an issue identified and start getting interventions. So, what was your journey then in supporting him after you have this diagnosis? You have your, your own goals, your lifestyle, your, goals to get back to work, whatever that may be, your daughter who you're taking, how did it impact your life?
Yeah. I think it's the thing that probably impacted my life, if the most. It's definitely top three. And to say that it was not difficult would be not truthful. I think number one, my life changed in that I had to put my career aside. My
Yeah.
dedication and focus had to be with both of my kids. And I used to always say having one child with special needs is like having two children with special needs. I was very conscious of the level of attention I was paying to my son and tried to balance out. Even so, as 18-year-olds now, they say they told me the other day, you know what, mom? There's no evidence that you have a favorite child. And I'm
Good for you.
done. Job done.
That,
Not that I
that
have,
is
but that was
success.
their observation. Yeah, they're like, no, there's no, you treat us the same, like what we need as individuals, but we can
Yeah.
show that you're even there. So back to like my life. So I think that's the first thing that I had to put that aside. And to be honest, it was heartbreaking because as I mentioned, I was so driven professionally, and just knowing that I had a purpose, and I still believe that, and I am honoring that now, but I had to put that to the side and really focus on my babies. And so it had its ups and downs, and I think there was times where it was probably darker than as far as my own mental health, and I probably would admit out loud. It was difficult. um I had to basically build my life around trying to avoid meltdowns. So children that are on the spectrum, we like to say they're not throwing temper tantrums, right? That's a different thing. But there is something called a meltdown where some type of sensory input just makes them lose it, right? And this can happen in the most inconvenient places, and it did. I have so many stories, some funny, some not so funny, of really being challenged in the moment. One example is I thought that I thought we were ready to go to the fair around I think age 7 or 8 because we had been through so much, and I surprised that my kids on a Friday night. We have a South Florida fair here in South Florida. It's in January, and I took them after school, but it's nighttime early at that time, and so we went to the fair. So if you can imagine the fair, right? Even as a typical person, there is so many lights and sounds and things, and all the sensory is an overload for anyone. And I just thought we were ready, right? So I surprised the kids. We went, I got the armbands, we got in our first line. to one of the rides, and my kid shut down. I mean, shut, when I say shut down, like threw himself on the floor, and he was inconsolable. And the thing is that people don't understand. You get judgment all of the time. People think your kid is just being a spoiled brat and that he's not getting what he wants. And you need to be a better parent. You need to tighten up. You need to take him over there and you need to spank him or whatever you need to do, right? And that's not what was happening. It was that it was too much input. And so we left, after paying a couple $100s to get everything settled. And I thought I was doing something wonderful. That's just one example. You have to pivot. I think I learned that probably just to the what I'm trying to say is it's insurmountable, the level of pivot that I had to do. And I think that has carried me through. So
And
that's just one example in real life.
yeah, that's a great example. And in addition to like the perceptions that you're picking up from people externally, I'm just curious about like the head trash going on because I think for many women, we like berate ourselves
Of
even
course.
worse than what we see coming at us about the shoulds and, get it together and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I think it starts from one, thinking it's your fault. You did
right.
something to contribute to this diagnosis. You didn't do the right thing while you were pregnant. You didn't choose the right partner. I don't know. Whatever it is, right? We do these things to tell ourselves that we failed somehow. And then I think mothers across the board are so hard on ourselves as far as the way we parent. Even when we're doing the best we think we can, we are doing a good job, right? It's not, you can never, there's no ceiling to any mother that says, okay, yeah, I'm satisfied with this. So yeah, that internal struggle of really accepting and honoring where you are and knowing that you just have to take the one step in front of the other is so important in this journey. It's nice to have plans, right? That's great. But ultimately, not looking too far ahead is what literally kept me sane, and to really focus on what you could do in the moment. And sometimes it is cry. Sometimes it is. So I think it's really important to self-soothe and really count on the people, even if it's a very small group of people, that can help you to understand that you're doing the best you can.
For sure, for sure. And so I'm curious how this experience, the collective experience as a parent, raising two children, how everything that you have learned along the way, how has that affected your work? Uh, how has that impacted your work?
There's so many ways. I think a couple that come to my mind is my compassion is so deep. I think I was always a compassionate person, but the journey of having someone who just their brain works a little bit differently helps me to further develop all of the things that I put out into the world, right? I'm a really big proponent of um, not just one size fits all, right? You have to deliver things that are going to really speak to the heart of different people. It's not the same. I think that has improved with me. I think the second thing is to savor and really celebrate the small steps in the journey. I think as entrepreneurs, we want it all, right? You want everything to just happen. And sometimes if we don't see those big goals we have set in our minds as success, I think we miss the whole thing. I think the baby steps and along the way is what really need to be celebrated. When my kids were smaller, I used to have what's called bottle up moments, and it was a thing that we would have all sorts of different experiences. Some, as I mentioned to you, with the fair, but then there was really, really beautiful ones. And I remember pausing, if it was me and the twins, we were having like a really, really good ice cream cone. And I was like, isn't this the best? We got to bottle this up. So we remember this feeling later. And so in the times where maybe we forget or lose sight of how good it really is, we'll remember this moment with this ice cream. And I definitely think I infuse that in the way that I approach, you know, my business, the way that I show up as a leader. I think that it definitely permeates that.
That makes a lot of sense. And I would say, just in the short time that we were together, it's just you have such high energy and a great sense of humor, and you just bring it, 100% to whatever you're doing. And I don't know, have you always been that way, or has that been a part of your personality that has evolved?
I think that's I think if you ask my mother or my family members or people that have known me for a long time, I definitely think that's consistent. And and even in the years of helping my son really grow and develop, I really jumped into learning too, right? I was like a beginner's mind. Like I set the stage as a student and I got every resource that I thought was, going to be beneficial. And then I educated others. And I did bring that same energy. And I think it's important if you are going through a situation where you get a diagnosis like this, is to really give your time and yourself the time and space to be a learner again, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah, and if we have anyone who's listening today who is newly dealing with an autism diagnosis or something similar, what advice do you have for them?
I would say that would probably lead me into the first thing I would say is become a student. Um, I think that really, self-development is, God, it just, there's so much power. You take back that power when you give yourself, that permission to learn as much as you can. I think that would be the first thing. Secondly, I'd take it or leave it advice, but don't let anyone else speak about your limitations for you or your child. So much external information will come to you. People will offer you their opinions and their 2 cents and all of that. I think you know what's best, right? And even if you don't know what's best, because you're a mom, you will find out what's best. And don't ever let anyone tell you that there's a limitation to success, there's a limitation to what your child will be able to do, because that's just not true. When my son was in elementary school and he finally got integrated into the regular classroom, he had an amazing teacher, and I think of her often and I thank her all the time. She's just an incredible, incredible teacher. She looked at me because she could see that I was so worried. And we were doing our first meeting, and she looked at me and she's like, "Your son will graduate from high school." And at that time, I was like, "Oh my God!" Like, that's not what I had heard, and I didn't know. And you just don't know. And now, not only did he graduate high school with honors, he just got accepted to university for the fall. There's no limit.
That's wonderful. And I feel like even though he's only 18, so much has changed.
Oh my goodness. Yes, absolutely.
So
Yes.
much has changed in the last 18 years. And just in the last couple of years, I've known two adults who were diagnosed in adulthood as
Wow.
being on the spectrum. So
Mhm.
I think that there's still, like, in the field of human development, there still is so much that is being learned. And I think neurodiversity is just we're just, like scratching the surface of
Yeah,
understanding it.
I agree.
Yeah. Um, so can you share with us a little bit about the book that you co-authored, International Women of Color Who Boss Up?
Sure, absolutely. It's right here to my left. And this was an anthology project where 16 of us, women of color from around the world, we all share our stories about the journey in entrepreneurship, and just some of the most inspiring stories that you'll hear about people's perseverance, and grit, and the ability to pursue their dreams against, basically, in a lot of instances, against all odds. It's one of those books that lifts you up if you need just an extra little, this can be you. These are the things, everyday people that have overcome a lot in order to make their dreams happen. So I'm really proud to be a part of this. We did reach Amazon bestseller. I'm really excited and proud about that. And the women that I share the pages with just are some of the most inspiring people, and all of what they have, as I mentioned, have done and what they're continuing to do now.
That's wonderful. That sounds like something that should be on all of our coffee tables
Oh, yeah.
when we need that we need that boost.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you also are a TEDx speaker. Can you tell
Mhm.
us about your talk, In Your Eyes?
Yeah. So my TED Talk is going to be 6 years old. 6 years old this
Wow.
year. I cannot believe it. It seems like ages ago, like a lifetime ago. So my talk is called In Your Eyes. And the premise is that we are all experiencing life behind our eyes, right? And all of the things that we've experienced, all of our values, they show up in our everyday and the way that we interact with others and the way that we connect with others. And so in my talk, I really explore kind of like some funny roots of, the way that we can defend our stances, even though we could be seeing different things looking at the same thing. It's actually science. But when it comes to storytelling, I use the power of archetypes, the notion of archetypes, to kind of really trying to get the idea that we are all, even if we're in something or we're experiencing something, we could all value very different things about that, and they're all good, right? Just because somebody approaches even a problem in a certain way doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means that we need to take a moment to listen to where they're coming from. And even though it might look different than us, there's other things that we have right at our fingertips that could help us to understand each other better. So it's basically about connection, human connection, the power of story, and how we perceive things. And it could be different or it could be the same. We just express it differently.
That's wonderful. And how did you end up getting on the TED stage?
I applied. I found a TED event that the theme of the event was really aligned with what I wanted to talk about, and I pitched the idea, and it feels like it just happened. It was kind of a whirlwind, really. At that point, I did have some speaking experience, but with TED and TEDx, it's really more about the idea worth spreading, and not so much about your speaking capabilities. I think if you're able to articulate an idea in a new way, because we're never really going to have something sometimes you have something brand new. Most times it's not brand new. But if you can spin it in a way that's interesting and maybe not considered, that's a sure way in to land a TED Talk.
That's awesome. And now, since we're just in February of the new year, is there anything that you're focused on promoting in your business?
I don't have anything currently other than my speaking. I think I've really, since our experience with Thought Leader Academy, I'm really focused on building my speaking business, and my thought leadership. So I have a couple of projects that are brewing, but they're not quite out yet. But speaking is always on the top of my list. It's my passion. It's what I think I'm good at. I feel like it's when everything aligns for me. So I think that would be probably what I'm most focused on now and probably throughout the rest of this year.
Yeah. You are definitely a great and engaging, high energy speaker, and very comfortable on the stage. So that definitely seems like home for you.
Oh, I appreciate that.
And Nicole, what is the best way for people to connect with you if they want to hear more about your speaking offers or more about your business?
I think the best way is LinkedIn. LinkedIn seems to be my home place. I have Instagram. It's not as much. I would say I do my most connection. The best place to find me is on LinkedIn.
Okay, great. So if you want to connect with Nicole, make sure to just send her a personalized message so that she knows how you saw her. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Nicole, and for sharing your story. I think that what you had to share is so helpful for everyone, whether they're parents or not, just about the life lessons and embracing the learning journey in our lives, no matter what we have planned.
Sure. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate being here with you.
Thanks, Nicole.